listener production.
Just a warning that the following episode discusses suicide.
Hey, Bension Siebert here for The Briefing. Australians have been talking about gambling ads and sport for a really long time now. The most recent part of that conversation has been a big push about almost totally banning gambling ads online and on TV. That push came from inside the Labor Party itself. It was championed by the late Labor MP Peter Murphy, who died last year. Yesterday, 9 newspapers reported that the government is walking away from a near-total ban and instead planning on banning gambling ads from social media and other digital platforms. For the big player, TV, the plan would now be to introduce caps on the number of gambling ads per hour and to ban them an hour before and after live sport. It's reportedly yet to make it to Cabinet, but it is already prompting outrage on both sides of this debate. Anti-gambling advocates say the new proposal doesn't go nearly far enough. They say people's lives across the country are being ruined by gambling every day and something big needs to be done. But the big players in this conversation, sporting bodies, say banning gambling ads threatens revenue that funds grassroots sport and free-to-air sport. And media companies, including NewsCorp and Nine, say that such a ban threatens jobs. David Pocock is in a unique position to deeply understand this issue. He's a former Rugby Union star and now independent senator for the ACT. David, welcome to The Briefing. Why should we get rid of gambling ads from Australian TV?
Australians are the biggest losers in the world when it comes to gambling. We lose $25 billion a year. And while no one's suggesting that we ban gambling, what we've seen is gambling companies, because it's such a lucrative market, because we lose so much money, spending $280 million a year on gambling advertising, which is normalizing gambling for young people. Children are seeing gambling ads and thinking that, well, this is just something that everyone does and I'm going to do it. And really worryingly, we're seeing people under the age of 18 now turning up to Gamblers Anonymous to try and deal with problem gambling. And this is something that the Parliament looked at last year. The late Peter Murphy, who was a Labor MP, chaired a committee that looked at gambling in Australia, and they recommended a phased-in total gambling ad ban over 3 years, recognising the harm that it's doing to Australians and particularly to young Australians.
Have you personally spoken to people whose lives have been affected by gambling ads on television?
I've spoken to a number of gambling organisations, advocates, people dealing with their own gambling addictions, talking about just how hard it is to actually deal with an addiction where every time you watch sport or turn on the TV or scroll your social media feed, you're being bombarded with ads. Recently, I was at a parliamentary event on gambling, and a family came in to talk about their son who'd struggled with a sports betting addiction over many years and had ultimately taken his own life. And I remember sitting there as they're reading his suicide note, thinking, what are we doing? How can we still be debating whether we should be allowing rampant advertising for gambling while families are losing their mostly sons to these products? This is having a huge effect on society. And we have a gambling industry that is making so much money and putting a huge amount of effort into making ads that are attractive to young people, that really hook them in as their favorite social media stars or athletes, talking about gambling and talking about the upside, how much fun it is, how sociable it is. We know that the reality for most people is that it's someone lying on the couch or in bed late at night and not being able to stop gambling on their phone. That's the reality. And this report, the Murphy Review, recommended a total gambling ad ban, and then a whole range of other measures to do with harm minimization, ensuring that the gambling industry actually pays for some of this work, and that it doesn't fall on taxpayers.
You mentioned that $280 million figure. That's a lot of money into the networks that provide free-to-air sport. What could we lose if that money doesn't come into those networks?
That 280 is across the board. That's everything. And yes, part of that will be going to networks. And there was an acknowledgement in the Murphy review that there needed to be a phased approach, needed to work with sports. This is a similar challenge that was faced when it came to phasing out or ending tobacco advertising. This really is about putting Australians, in particular young Australians, health and well-being above the bottom line of mostly multinational sports betting companies, and breaking that nexus between professional sport and gambling advertising. You've got to ask, well, what is sport for? Is it something that people can participate in, can challenge themselves physically and mentally, learn a whole bunch of life skills, be part of something bigger than themselves? And then when they're supporting their favorite team, same thing, that rush of being part of something bigger than you and being part of a crowd? Or is it just something that we allow to flog off harmful products like gambling to people who are watching? And so I think this is something that we have an opportunity as a parliament to actually say, well, this is about Australians' health and well-being rather than an industry that's making a huge amount of money off the sort of pain and misery of thousands of people in our communities who are more and more addicted to these products.
How did you feel about this issue when you were working as a professional athlete?
There were always sponsors that you were slightly uncomfortable with. I think because Rugby Union isn't as big as League and AFL, I don't remember there being as much gambling advertising, and I think it's something that's certainly ramped up in the last 5-10 years, and something that families are worried about. And as an independent senator, I'm certainly hearing from people I represent here in the ACT that this is something that they want dealt with. And polls show that across the country, about 70% of Australians want a total ad ban when it comes to gambling. They want to be able to watch sport or TV without being bombarded by gambling ads and their kids seeing them. So I think this is something that the Parliament needs to take very seriously. It's disappointing that it's taken the government 14 months to actually come up with any sort of response to the Murphy review. And I would urge them to have courage to actually implement it in full, not come up with some patchy ban, which we know will get patchy results. The gambling industry will find workarounds. We've seen that in other jurisdictions where there are loopholes, they will be exploited.
What do you say to someone who might say this is nanny state stuff? Many of the people who are gambling are adults. Some of them certainly aren't. But why is it the government's job to change this picture?
This is something that does get sort of thrown at you. My view is that for over 18s, there's nothing stopping you going and having a punt, having all the apps on your phone, or going down to the local pub and placing bets. This is about young people and protecting them. And I think there is a real role for elected representatives and for government to show leadership and to say these can be incredibly harmful products. We know that they can be addictive, and to expose young people to them is unacceptable, just as we did with things like tobacco. And so I think there's a real role to say, yes, if you're over 18, go for it. But if you're a young person, you should not be seeing gambling advertising, and we know that they are. And talking to researchers in this space, one of the really worrying things apart from the fact that 75% of young people now think that gambling is just a normal part of watching sport, is that when you actually talk to mostly young men and boys about the ads that they're seeing on their feed, they actually really like them. The gambling industry is spending huge money on designing ads that really speak to young people's interests, their favorite social media personalities, athletes. It looks like fun. And they're saying, well, actually, I enjoy watching these ads. They're entertaining. And so it's no wonder why we're seeing so many young people under the age of 18 actually finding workarounds and starting to place bets.
Do you think that the government is right to focus on social media as the place to start banning gambling advertisements, given that the concern is around young people and that those ads can be targeted so specifically to individuals in a way that television ads just can't?
Well, it has to be part of it. And Peter Murphy really didn't mince her words when she said in her report, gambling ads are grooming children. So yes, social media has to be part of it, but we know from other jurisdictions, if you have a patchy response, there are workarounds and there are loopholes that the gambling industry will absolutely exploit. The advertising landscape is huge, and we don't know how this proposed frequency cap will apply to online services, things like 10Play, 9 Now, SBS On Demand, or whether it'll extend to Netflix, who have now allowed gambling ads as part of their ad-supported tier. There's a whole heap of discrepancies between, TV through an aerial and then on-demand catch-up TV, which we know more and more Australians are watching. And the Parliament looked at this, and that committee said, given everything we're seeing here, total ad ban is the thing that makes sense. And we know that that's what Australians want. So why, yet again, are politicians so far behind, and why are they capitulating to the gambling industry and not following through with what the vast majority of Australians want?
Well, David Pocock, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks for having me. Great to chat.
Senator David Pocock there. And that's it for this episode of The Briefing. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow from 6 a.m. In the meantime, we'd love it if you could share this or really any episode of The Briefing that you like with a friend. And subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you soon.